Hey folks, so my first drill in this month's metabolic stability piece is the windmill. Probably by far my favorite feel-good loaded exercise there is. You can load it relatively heavy. It's a great drill, but I want to talk about some inconsistencies that are happening out there in the world, and especially in relevance to shoulder stability. Often I'm sure people talk about using the get up in shoulder stability, but that's a little bit further down the road from what we're talking about today. We're talking about establishing that shoulder stability, whereas the get up, there's so much more time under tension. It's a much longer drill. There's many more moving parts. Some people seem to think that the windmill is more complex than the get up. I definitely disagree with that. It's a great drill. The windmill itself is for developing really great shoulder stability with some load. As contrary to the get up is a lot more broad training spectrum drill. So what we're going to jump into, the other inconsistency is that people often use or substitute positionally and movement wise the yoga triangle with the windmill, and so I'm going to try to kind of clear up some of that stuff here as well, and then show you kind of how we do it, at least the intent behind me and Josh. First off, and I did a little bit of research on this, the yoga triangle is set up in this really super wide stance. They pivot over and such, so the foot position, not the foot width, but the position looks pretty similar. And then, at least as far as I can tell, the intent is to kind of make this a kind of a 90-degree L between such and such. I'm no yoga aficionado, but I know the difference between what they're doing and the intent what we're doing. The two stark, striking differences are, one, the foot width position, the foot width, not necessarily the direction, but the width is much different. We always try to work from an athletic base. That's exactly what the windmill is working from, and we're going to show it to you today. And then the other very obvious, should be blatantly obvious difference is that we've got load. They don't have load in their position. I'm not saying it's bad or good, but they're just different, and so we shouldn't try to use the two things interchangeably. That's the real take-home point. So we've got the good athletic stance. All we do is pivot open and then pivot a little bit. That's where probably people are getting hung up a little bit, and just it kind of looks, somewhat similar, but it's not at all. And then the load, right? We've got this load out on the end of this long elbow, so we need to use our body to wind up with those sling systems, that fascia and that musculature, and move into the position where we can create really good strength and stability that allow this shoulder joint that we're talking about, that's our focus right now, to be exposed to a little bit of that time under tension, and for us to really safely be able to get out of it if we need to. So as such, I always kind of like to create a clean from this position. Boom, as such, up into position. I've got a little bit of knee bend, right? Again, that's different from the kind of yoga triangle, right? There got a really straight knee. We've got some knee bend, but we're not bending the knee forward. You'll see as you go down. Some people like to create this to make their windmill happen. You want to just keep that knee bent, but not bending, is like I say. Eyes on the weight, and I'm going to load this rear hip. And then I'm going to use it to create some good tension through that oblique area and extend. As with almost anything with the kettlebell, we're creating that hip hinge, right? You can kind of see it right here. And extension, right? Fantastic drill. It's going to be a nice key cog in creating good shoulder stability. You can see I can come in and out of that. I can create some partial ranges of motion if I need to. I can make it a little bit less time under tension. Things that are very difficult to do with the get up, but are very, very specific and relevant to the windmill. The setup's different from a yoga triangle, so hopefully those key points make a big difference from a coaching standpoint and a setup standpoint. If you have people that have real issues there, you can just take and do some low loading and put them into that position and get that opened up and work them towards doing good windmills. But it's a fantastic drill. It's a drill that I use in my athletes' total shoulder repair program that we work into very effectively. So that's kind of where we're at with the windmill and how it's going to help you create really great shoulder stability.
So our next drill is going to be using our ultimate sandbag. I'm going to use a strength ultimate sandbag here. You probably want to use one of the bigger bags, so that would be a strength or ability. You can use a power, but it's going to be better with bigger bags, and that'll make sense in a moment. And I have it attached at a low anchor point to a right band. Now, I've attached it to the suitcase handle. It's just the best place to do so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use feedback of the band and the position of the bag to give me a lot of information upon my movement pattern. Now, what we're going to do is predominantly, it's kind of like the windmill, a hip hinge. And we're not actually going to move the arms. What we're going to do is support the weight into my body. So I'm going to have a moving plank with my torso. And then, again, why would this help shoulders? Like, there's nothing happening with the shoulder, but there is. So again, if you read the write-up, and I encourage that you do, lat, core, glute work very closely together. So if your glute is not working, like everyone talks about glute amnesia, that probably relates to issues potentially in the shoulder. If your core feels unstable, you're not able to stabilize that core in more functional patterns, you're not able to hold that plank as you move, can have implications in your shoulder. So this is a great drill to do, especially if someone is maybe coming out of a recent shoulder injury where they can't do a lot with the shoulder. They can learn to use that lat in conjunction with their core and glutes, and you can actually be doing shoulder rehab without actively moving the shoulder through too much range of motion. We're also going to be statically working those thoracic extensors and upper back muscles. So some of those postural muscles that fatigue on people that cause them to do this. So let's get into it. I'm going to go ahead. When you're starting at the weigh-in position, start so there's no tension upon the band. That would be bad, okay? As soon as you sort of high pull the weight, it would snap back upon you. Now I'm just going to high pull it to scoop my arms underneath. So I'm going to get nice and close. Okay? This is a little heavier band than I would normally use, but it works. And so you saw that was a little low. Now I'm going to pull the bag apart. So see, this is the important part, the tension. This will also not only help your shoulder, but it'll help you clean up any hip hinge problems. I take about a deadlift stance. I'm grabbing the ground with my feet. I'm pulling the bag in tightly, and I'm pushing my hips back while I'm pulling the bag apart. Drive through my feet nice and tall. I can take a step back to increase the intensity. So what's happening is, and the reason I'm not squatting is because the band is pulling me forward, so it makes me want to get my hips back. I push to the ground, get tall. And you can see how my shoulders get active by pulling the bag apart, pulling into my body as I'm coming into that hip hinge. When I'm ready to return, come in nice and close. You can dump the weight down. So you should have seen the moving plank, and I have to hold that tension. If the shoulders start to roll, I lose my plank. If I drop my pelvis, I lose my plank. So having the feedback and an anchor point teaches me how to create proper tension in the movement, which is so important because a lot of us, we understand that our client needs to create the tension, but how do you teach them how to do it effectively, simply, and sometimes in a very large environment such as groups, or even semi-private where you don't necessarily have the time to sit there and watch every movement they do. Use simple tools to give them that feedback to produce better movement. All right, so our next drill is called the Ultimate Sandbag Ribbon, and what you're going to want is probably a core Ultimate Sandbag here, because this is where a little bit of weight goes a long ways. Now, the concept of the ribbon is this. Having talked to people like Dr. Ed Thomas, who brought the Indian clubs back, we've lost this idea of circular motion. And if you think about our shoulder joint, it's such a joint that allows such great range of motion, which makes it a great tool, but also causes a lot of issues for a lot of people. So what we want to do is teach how to be synergistic in our movement and fluid so that the shoulder is not bearing all the load, but our entire chain is creating that motion. Rotation is basically where we live when we want to do anything powerful. But we lose that over time, so I'm going to go over some ways that you can progress this drill. Now I'm going to show you the ribbon. You can try it with your clients. It's actually not so bad to teach, and I'm going to show you some regressions to it. Now I'm going to grab the middle of the Ultimate Sandbag. That's one of the reasons that makes it so good, is I can actively grip on the bag. When you grip, you activate a lot of the rotator cuff complex as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grip, and I'm going to actually corkscrew my shoulders in like I was going to do a hip hinge. I am as I pivot. Now I'm just going to go to about knee height. I'm going to do this slow motion. I'm actively pushing through both feet. I drive through my hip. I pivot. I wrap the weight around, I pivot again, and I finish upon the opposing side. So it's going to look like this. Now, there's a lot of foot action. There's a lot of hip mobility. There's a lot of core stability. I have to be fluid in my motion. The interesting part is that people have embraced Indian clubs as a mobility drill, But why aren't we doing loaded mobility training is the question. So this is a great loaded mobility exercise. Now, if you can't do this with your clients, too much complexity, we can break it down. First is let's just teach them some around the worlds. So if we grab the same grip and teach them how to resist rotation, wrapping this around. Now, you may say to yourself, wow, that looks a lot like a kettlebell halo. It does, but the range of motion is so much greater, so it taxes my core and my hips so much more. And the range of motion that my arms actually go through are like a lift and chop, more so than they are like a halo. And then I can start doing little rotational press outs to start patterning my footwork. Because again, I'm creating force from the ground up. What we ultimately want with functional fitness is movement efficiency. So if you're just muscling through that, you don't understand how to connect those chains optimally. So drills like this can go a long ways. Now, if you want to initially use this for a mobility drill, that's great. But we can load this over time and add layers and have it much more of a strength complexity drill that really does wonders for strengthening your chains, increasing your mobility, and making your body smarter and more efficient.
Hey crew, welcome back to my second part for this one's metabolic stability. We're out here, we got a little bit of distance, and we're going to talk about doing carries. The common carry is the farmer's walk. And that might sound kind of weird to you in regards to helping create better shoulder stability. Some of you have caught on to that, and basically here, this is kind of comes to kind of fruition from the strongman training that Josh and I did back in the 2007-2005 time frame. But you've got to establish a good position. A lot of people get endpoint centric with farmer's walk, and they just try to do it at any cost. We got to develop that good position here and move as such. The other thing that often happens, and I'm going to do this walking away from you so hopefully you can hear me, is they kind of turn into a runway model, if you will. As they're walking, you'll see the hips kind of wobble underneath of them. And that's a little bit load dependent. But if we think about things in terms of a whole system, you've got to think about hip stability leaking into shoulder instability. Those two things are linked. So if we're doing the old runway model sachet, you're not training the system well, you're just moving a weight from point A to point B, and I mean, even a monkey can do that. The other two things we want to talk about here before we dive into how we're going to provide the solutions are the common progressions from the basic farmer's walk, which is just to go to single arm farmer's walk, right? So here, which often ends up into this kind of lateral twist away and dump, usually fires up the erectors and QL, just taking one problem to create another. If you got shoulder instability and try and create shoulder stability by doing carries, and then you dump into the hip. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then the other one that's a little too over aggressive is bottoms up. Oftentimes you'll see bottoms up being done in a bilateral, super tense bilateral position, not really daily life, right? Things happen in a very active, dynamic sense of terms, or walking in that bottoms up position. I just don't think the cost validates the benefit on that one. So I think we got a couple smart things to show you here. I think you're going to really enjoy them on how to change the position ever so slightly. I'm going to adjust my watch just a smidge. Actually, I'm going to put it in my pocket. And see how it correlates to being dynamic and moving and create really great shoulder stability. So what we're going to do is we're going to get to the rack position. There's a ton of things you can do with this. You can use offset kettlebells. We can talk about that a little bit. You can do some things, but you're going to get the essence of what we're talking about here. We're going to get that rack position here. So moving the kettlebells up the lever arm so we can be super efficient again here. And we're just going to bury that upper back in, right? Get that thing turned on. And then we're just going to walk a little bit. Right? Nice and simple. But what we're going to do when we walk is we're going to pause. So we're going to create some isometric hold in a position, a body position of instability. So if I'm going to walk, and boom, look what I'm at. If I shorten up that step just a smidge, hopefully you can see it here, I'm in my sprinter stance position. I've created a body position of instability to help me create stability in the shoulder up top by holding this rack position. Let me show you a few more rounds with it. So. So you can see how natural that looks when we just fall right into that position of sprinter stance. So I've created a little bit of instability there in my body position in order to help me really turn on that musculature I want to. So we could go a lot of different places. We could go offset. I could have, if I have a really kind of sticky shoulder, if you will, I could use a lighter kettlebell on that rack side because I have enhanced my position of leverage where the load's at. I could use that there and still use a heavier one over here. That's completely fine. So it's a great possibility. Or, I'm going to show you in a second, I could just increase my body or my body position instability. So let's take a look at it. What happens if I walk and I end up in an isometric here? I try to shorten up my steps there, that last one, to stay on camera. But I think you get where we're going here. There's so many variables. It's such an underused position. It's a great position once you've got that farmer's walk down. You can maintain that good body position. The next thing is to come up in the position.